Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of NFTs Unlocked. As always, I'm Jeremy, and this is my co-host Sam. Today we're going to bring you something a little different than we usually do. We had an awesome opportunity to connect with the creators of one of our favorite projects, Thorguards, that was featured in episode 2 of NFTs Unlocked. And we wanted to bring him on to discuss his outlook on the future of NFTs and what's defined as Web3, or the next iteration of the internet as we know today. And before we dive into the interview, I just want to remind everybody to let us know your thoughts on the interview in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that bell for notifications if you want to be notified every time we post a new video. We're going to be bringing a lot of cool people onto the show over the next couple of weeks, a lot of content creators and community leaders, and we just want you guys to be informed as soon as possible when we have those new episodes out. You can find all those links to our socials in the video description below, as well as all Thorguard related content. We'll also link that in the description below. So without any further ado, 0xNguyen, founder of runebase.org, founder of Thorchain, and creator of the Thorguards NFT project, welcome to the show.
Hi everybody, let me welcome on 0xNguyen. Today we're going to be talking about Web3, the next iteration of the internet, and what that means for NFTs and you. So first off, I'd like to say thank you for joining us, and let's dive right into the questions. With the rise in popularity in terms like NFT, crypto, and the metaverse, the term Web3 is becoming more and more commonplace. So can you give us your definition of Web3 and what Web3 means to you?
Yeah, I think to understand Web3, you got to put it in the context of what is Web 1 and Web 2. And how I understand those definitions and distinguish between those eras of the internet are Web 1 was the simple kind of like not super interactive, like portfolio sites, essentially, like things that you could read, you could basic interactions with email, SMTP, but you were mostly just visiting web pages that displayed information. Web 2 introduced the interactive web. These were applications that were hosted in the cloud, and you could do full interactive things like anything from Facebook to Uber to Amazon to Instagram. And it was much more interactive. And then it unleashed the era of self-publishing, where everybody could become a publisher on something like a Facebook, a Twitter, or a Tumblr, or an Instagram. But the platforms were owned by centralized corporate monolithic entities. Web 3 is the next iteration of that, and it's the decentralized web based on like blockchain underpinnings. And this is a network, or an era, I should say, where the networks are not owned by centralized corporate monolithic corporations, but we're going back to this open nature, open source software built on open blockchains, globally accessible, and it's much more privacy supporting. Users can own their own data. The data isn't stored centrally on corporate infrastructure, and I think it's a ray of hope. I think it's something that people that understand it get really excited about.
Okay, great. Can you elaborate on some of the drawbacks of Web 2 being a more centralized iteration of the internet, and then talk about what you're looking forward to most with Web 3 becoming more decentralized?
Yeah, so there's a lot of disadvantages and advantages of each of these paradigms. The main disadvantages of Web 2 are, first off, the amount of power that gets centralized around a few corporations. They establish all this network effects of data, user base, money, kind of government, like policy, like kind of control, and they leverage that in anti-competitive ways. They can censor people. They're not globally accessible. And this is, one thing for e-commerce or for social, but when we think about financial infrastructure, it really creates global exclusivity. And that leads into the advantages of Web3. The power is decentralized, leverage data and controls given back to users, and they're globally accessible networks, and they are uncensorable, unstoppable. So you're not kind of at the behest of whatever local government or political regime that you happen to be in, which sounds like a luxury for Americans, but for a lot of the world is actually a major feature of Web3 that's going to prove to be a very powerful feature for them.
So when do you think Web3 will really begin to start showing itself? And when do you think we'll start to experience some of the benefits of a decentralized internet?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to have a framework when you think about timelines of new technology. And there's a framework that's called it's an adoption curve framework. It looks like a bell curve, and this was popularized by a book called Crossing the Chasm. And the bell curve has at the early stage you have innovators, and then you have early adopters, and then you have early majority. That's the up of the bell curve, and then the down of the bell curve is the late majority, and then the tail end of the bell curve is the laggards. And so with Web 2, with things like email and search and e-commerce, we're firmly in the late stage of that bell curve, to where only laggards aren't using e-commerce and email and stuff. So for Web 3, for things like NFTs and DeFi products and Ethereum wallets, these are firmly still in the innovator stage. I'd say arguably we've crossed into early adopters. Yeah, into early adopters, but we're definitely not into early majority. Now, as far as timeline, that could be a number of things. What applications are being built, how big of a push things like Coinbase, Crypto.com, and FTX are doing in the U.S. at least to popularize and get brand awareness for crypto. But the big open question there in terms of timeline, at least in the West, is government regulation. And that's an open question I honestly don't have that much insight into. But I'd say outside of that, it feels like we're pushing more and more there with those brands that I mentioned, buying arenas or naming rights to arenas, major celebrity endorsements, athletes, hip hop artists getting CryptoPunks and Bored Apes, that kind of thing. So between those pushes and NFTs, I think doing a lot to popularize Web3 and crypto, I'd say it's in the next year and a half, these things move quickly, and I'd say early majority is next on the horizon.
Now let's shift the conversation over to the NFT space. How do you see the applications for NFTs expanding with the adoption of Web3 over the next couple years? What possibilities do you see here?
Oh man, that's such an endless question because, yeah, I mean, it's exciting. Yeah, I mean, first, again, think of a framework or an analogy to Web 2. It's like asking what you might be able to do with a web page at the beginning of at the end of Web 1, right? Like 2001, 2000. Like we wouldn't, at the time, it was like a way to display words and images, with GeoCities and AngelFire websites. And we might not have conceptualized that would have turned into Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, then Uber, Instacart, DoorDash with mobile. And so NFTs as a primitive, they could evolve in all sorts of directions. Right now we're seeing a very rudimentary implementation of it with artwork represented. But soon, it's very conceivable that we will be doing things like governance, expansions of the notions of governance, anything from your local school board to local like elections, fundraising, and then with NFTs it could turn into things like fractionalization of ownership of large scale real world assets like land or real estate. I think we've only seen the beginning of that. And as more and more of our lives go online, unique digital assets are they're everything in our lives in the real world. They'll be represented in the metaverse and in Web3 through NFTs. So, we could talk about that for a whole series, and I'm open to it. Yeah.
Let's stay with the concept of the metaverse.
Sure.
How do you see NFTs coming into play here? You see Facebook changing their name to Meta every day, news articles coming up with brands trying to enter the metaverse. Can you give us a quick definition of what the metaverse actually is and what that means for the everyday person who is unfamiliar with this term?
Yeah, so by some definitions, we already are spending a lot of times in a metaverse, which is just, a digital interactions and a digital ecosystem through which we can engage, like we are communicating right now through Riverside or Zoom, engaging with communities on Discord, on Twitter. By some definitions, we're already experiencing a version of metaverse, and as those platforms grow to become higher bandwidth, higher resolution, we have more immersive interfaces, things like maybe VR goggles or more 3D immersive experiences like MMOs, like video games on your computer. As more of our lives like come into this paradigm, things like, for example, like just take profile picture NFTs right now, and some that are exclusive and higher priced. To own a true CryptoPunk or EtherRock or Bored Ape is a early form of status symbol and flexing in this digital world. And as funny as that might sound to some people, there's this analogy where, like, if you have like there are other status symbols that we have in the world, like our car or our house or our watch, and those are only visible locally. For someone to have like a nice watch, there might only be 30 people in the world that have that know you have that watch. Whereas if you have a Bored Ape or a CryptoPunk as your profile picture and it's verified in the metaverse, like potentially thousands, like hundreds of thousands, millions of people can see that if you have a big enough platform. So that's just one example of how you take something that people understand in the real world and how it expands into the metaverse. Soon, it's clear that already, if you use DeFi products or if you're using any Web3 products, your Ethereum wallet address, you can sign transactions to verify your identity and get access to, things like your wallets, your data, your files, your NFT collections on different platforms, and so our identities are increasingly going to be represented in Web3 through private key signing through our digital signatures, and our artwork collections, our media collections, our books, our movies, our archives of interactions like this. All of that will be accessible through this hopefully decentralized metaverse paradigm. That's something else we can talk about, is that there are centralized metaverses that are coming up as well. I think there's a lot of, it's an exciting design space. We're just at the beginning of that frontier, and that'll unfold over the next year, 2 years, 5 years. Yeah.
Awesome, great. Can you give us an example of a centralized metaverse?
Yeah, so we have some decentralized versions like Decentraland or Sandbox or the Axie metaverse, and then we have like centralized Web 2 companies that are looking to expand into not Web 3, but into these like kind of AR worlds. And I think Facebook, what the company previously known as Facebook, now Meta, is obviously kind of like the leader there. But they bought Oculus, they changed their name to Meta, and they've already teased a lot of these like 3D virtual reality worlds. And just like they owned social, they want to own our attention and monetize it in this next paradigm. And it really it's this kind of centralized monolithic corporation that their business model would be to monetize us through selling our data to advertisers. And I think they've proven time and time again over the last 3-5 years that they're really kind of like abusing their position of power and leverage. And as much as possible, if decentralized competitors can come up that can foster an ecosystem of developers that are all building on top of an open metaverse, we'd be much better off for it.
Okay, next question. Do you see any drawbacks associated with what we just touched upon with the metaverse? As people's lives become more digital from a social standpoint, from a technology standpoint, how could this harm people?
Yeah. There's just like with any technology, there are a lot of potential, downsides, some very real ones. I mean, you mentioned the social aspects. How does it impact us, or especially like young developing, children and not infants, but like children and teenagers, when more of your life gets digitized? On one hand, you have access to a whole new world of information, of knowledge, of resources that weren't available locally before. So just take the proliferation of like chess grandmasters. It used to be, they were dense clusters of them in like New York and parts of Russia. But now, because of chess.com and Twitch and YouTube, international masters, young, kids in their teens are becoming international masters from all over the world. So it's democratized access to information and data. But at the same time, people are becoming more and more, I don't know, maybe they're not engaging as much in meat space in real life. Maybe they're not, maybe they're losing some of that early socialization. Maybe their brain, some of these digital products have been designed by centralized Web2 companies to release dopamine and endorphins and serotonin on certain randomized reward trigger events. And if those same elements are engineered into these metaverses in the future, there's a risk of technology addiction that must be contended with. What this does for local governance, for federal governments, for the especially when you think of cryptocurrencies to centralized kind of like a traditional financial infrastructure. There's some major transitions that could be, depending on how they happen, they might be kind of rough. There's a lot of open questions about how this unfolds, but and it's not all sunshine and rainbows, for sure.
All right, let's end with a bit of a fun question. Is there any one project associated with Web3, project, idea, application, it can be anything, that you've had your eye on, that you've identified, that you really think is going to have a big impact on the world, something that you're really excited about?
Man, it's really, it's tough to pin one thing down because the entire ecosystem is one of the things in this world that I have the most optimism around. There's a lot of, dark things going on, but I think, man, I hope this isn't going to be too long-winded of an answer, but I'll try and be succinct. What Web 2 did for data and for information and communication, Web 2 for data, communication, and information, it globalized it and it democratized it. So we can have Zoom calls and interact with people and learn from people all around the world, despite where they're from. Anybody that has a mobile device and internet connection, which is like most of the world at this point, can get access to Stanford Open courseware and can theoretically get on a Zoom call with anybody else in the world. It's incredible. But particularly money. Money did not follow information and communication onto the internet rails because of the traditional financial infrastructure, like trusted corporate banks and institutions that were controlled, that were controlling them, that control the money flow in Web 2 in the traditional financial world. With Web 3, with the open, decentralized currencies, anybody can participate in the global economy in a way that mirrors information and communication and data from Web 2. So now anybody with an internet connected device, it might take them, 20 days and 30% of the transaction to receive US dollars or whatever, but it might take them mere minutes and just a few dollars today, hopefully fractions of a penny in the future, to get Ethereum or stable coins or synthetic assets that mirror synthetic crypto assets that mirror world-class investments like American stocks. So anybody in the world has access now to world-class banking and world-class currencies and world-class investment opportunities. And what that's going to do for the global global workforce, for the global meritocracy, I think is extremely exciting. So just that notion of global inclusion and access into a global marketplace, I think that's what gets me the most excited.
Okay, awesome. Great answer there to end it. Okay, so let's say thank you to 0xNguyen from Thorguards. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us a little bit more about Web3 and educate our viewers more on this next iteration of the internet. Guys, please take some time, check out the Thorguards project on OpenSea, check out their Twitter, Discord, and website. Links are in our video description. Again, thanks so much for joining us, and this will end the interview. Thanks a lot.
I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with 0xNguyen from Thorguards. A special thanks to him for coming on the show. I thought it was a really insightful conversation about Web3 and the future of our internet and the future of NFTs. Be sure to check out Thorguards Twitter and Discord if you haven't already. They're a really cool project that, as you know, we're an investor in, and we think they have some really exciting stuff in the pipeline. And that's it for this week. Be sure to like and comment and subscribe if you haven't already. Post something in the comments below if you feel so inclined to. And as always, I'm Jeremy. This is Sam. This is NFTs Unlocked, and we'll see you next week.